Firstly, thank you very much, Paul, for giving me opportunity to interview you for my YouTube channel and podcast.
No worries, no worries, no. As long as I'm okay to share it with all my contacts and what have you. So,
So I thought to tell about you and the work that you are doing and the work that you already did to my audience.
yeah,
So can you please
right.
introduce yourself to my audience?
Yes, we'll do. So, well, good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. My name is Paul Taylor. I've been working, as you can probably tell by the accent, in the United Kingdom for probably getting on to nearly 33 years in primarily in implementing change across financial services, banks, insurance companies, oil and gas, and academia, which is like business schools and what have you, and also in some charitable organisations in the UK. I've covered. I've covered a number of different types of change projects, and they cover anything from outsourcing, offshoring, implementing new regulations, technology change, regulatory change, plus many others really. And one of the varieties I quite like doing change management. The actual job itself is quite varied. No project or no initiative's ever the same. In addition to that, I do a number of other items. I author and speak on a variety of subjects. Most of that is taken from either my own professional and academic research or from things I've picked up over my 33 years working in the industry. And it covers things such as change management, technology, financial services, research, how to do research, to be more importantly, and also one that's very seems to be very keen at the moment is around sort of cyber risk and cyber security, and in particular in the UK, the impacts of Brexit. I've published 4 books at the moment, and I'm looking to publish another 2. The 4 books, the first 2 books are actually published under my name, which one's around freelancing, one's on change management. I've published 2 textbooks for a trade association on financial services in the UK, and fingers crossed by the UK summer anyway, June, I should have published one on emerging technology and another one on change management. I'm a chair and non-exec director for a number of industry forums, everything from technology, financial services. I also look after 2 charitable organisations. One's around gambling awareness, addiction, which is proven to be a big problem in the UK at the moment. And the second one's around offering opportunities to Black, Asian, minority ethnics in West London, to try and give them opportunities after school around acting, dance, speak, artistic. I do various amounts of mentoring to individual people, covering everything from career planning to selecting an MBA, all the way up and down to strategic planning for organisations, or down to somebody's just got a career issue they want to talk about. I work for the UK's Open University, which is a distance learning education on a course that's called Managing IT, the Why, the What, and the How, which is effectively a sort of IT management course. So very, very untechnical, but it's more around implementing technology, the day-to-day management of the technology, and requirements and data modeling. And finally, as I mentioned before, many, many years ago, probably before most of you were born, listen to this, I got an MBA from Yoga University last century to make everybody feel very old. So that's me.
So before that, can you please put your camera a little downward so that you can fit in screen?
All right.
Yeah, this is great. So your present job is now non-executive director in right thing. So how is this as a part-time?
Yeah, to be honest with you. But at the moment, I'm sort of taking a breather at the moment between the consultancy assignments because I had those 2 books to write. But I obviously still, and hopefully, I'm going to pick up some consultancy work. Probably, hopefully, fingers crossed, at the end of the month. Yeah. So the excuse me, I'm at the moment I do probably I would say 4 type of non-exec roles at the moment. The first one I did was something called Skips, which is SKIPZ Productions. This is an organisation that is set up. It's called a CIC, which is like a charitable organisation structure in the UK, and that was set up back in about 7 or 8 years ago, and I came on board as a non-exec director just to try and give the funders and the management team some, let's say, some impartial advice. Because while the people who set up the organisation are very, very smart, they know what they're doing. Sometimes they just need a little bit, let's say, somebody they can speak to confidentially regarding problems. So we've covered things like strategy, how to cope during COVID-19 lockdown, because this is the organisation that does a lot of face-to-face school clubs, after-school clubs, dancing. So when they had COVID, obviously all them stopped. So we had to almost switch overnight to running all these courses over the internet and over Zoom and using Teams. So that's very good, actually. I quite enjoy that. It's very therapeutic, and sometimes you feel quite good because you feel like you're putting something back into the community. The second non-exec is something called Red Card Gambling Project, and it's set up again about 5 years ago, maybe. Again, by a chap who was a footballer or a soccer player, if anybody from America is listening, who he played at a very high level, but then had a gambling addiction, and he lost most of his money, ruined his life, lost his wife, all sorts of nasty things happened. And he again, very similar to Skip's production, very, very passionate about what he wants to do, and obviously he's experienced addiction and the low of addiction and gambling addiction. So he's very, very good at speaking to youngsters or anybody who's worried about gambling addiction. So again, I was sort of brought in as almost like a business advisor to help him with structuring the company, funding. And I think this one is a particularly good one because I mean, I don't know about other jurisdictions, but at the moment, gambling addiction is a big worry in the UK, and in particularly in other parts of Europe. And the gambling companies have a lot of power. In the UK, they sponsor a lot of soccer or football, the Premier League. They obviously sponsor, I think they sponsor cricket, golf, and lots of others. So they've got a lot of power, and their adverts are very, very, very prominent. So again, there's nothing wrong with gambling, far from it. I mean, we all like a flutter. I like a flutter on the horses and what have you. But I think it's when the gambling becomes a major issue and it starts to take over your life, then it becomes a problem. So what we tend to focus on, we tend to speak to individuals like schools, prisons, housing associations, organisations, and ask trade unions as well. Actually, is one we're trying to think to, and speak to them and say, if you've got a gambling addiction, don't speak to you need to go and get proper help. Go and speak to your GP, go and speak to your doctor, go and speak to a proper form. But what we can do is we can give you an awareness if you think you may have a problem. Yeah, because there's no, a lot of people gamble a lot, but they haven't got addicted. A lot of people drink a lot of alcohol. Doesn't mean they're alcoholic. They just like a drink. There's various. So when the guy who runs it, Tony, goes out and speaks to the world, he would talk about his own problems and say how he felt, the emotional ties, good and bad, that gambling drew him into. And then when he goes out, and he's almost saying, if you're feeling any of these, you may have a problem. If you're feeling some of these, then you probably got a problem. And if you're feeling these, then I suggest you ring Gambling's Anonymous quickly before it takes over your life. The third one I actually do is something called TSAM, which is the Summit of Asset Management, and this is financial services, and I'm on their board of advisors because I've been working 33 years in the financial services asset management industry, and I like to think I've got a large amount of experience on it. So what we do is we run a conference. It's primarily in the UK, but they are in the east coast of America, New York, Boston. And I know they're thinking of trying to do them around the world, where it's like 3 or 4 days. You get, almost like you have a number of different classes running in parallel. So when we did it last time, we had one on regulation, we had one on data management, one on emerging technology, one on compliance and stuff. And we try and get various subjects. So we just think about, why would somebody want to come to a conference in midweek, take time out of their work, what they want to learn. And we just sit down and work out. We come at about 30 subjects, and normally just to help them out, and also because I quite enjoy it, I try and chair one of the days to say, so I'll stand up and do some antidotes, try and make them laugh, and say this is what we've got going. Introduce the first speaker, he or she will come on and talk about Brexit or something. Maybe do an interview session with almost like this sometimes, although sometimes it's face to face, fingers crossed, in the post-COVID world. And we talk through a wide number of different subjects, and that's quite therapeutic as well. The next item and non-exec I do is something called Bright Think. And that's a commercial organisation as opposed to a charitable organisation, and it's an online educational firm where we just do online courses for what anybody wants to do. We particularly focus on sort of technology and healthcare. So students can go online and do a training course online without necessarily having to go to university or going to training classes. I think this is very, very good because I think obviously in the UK in particular, when I was growing up, there was always a culture that if you went to school or went to university after 21, there was something wrong with you. You were like a geek or you're a nerd or something like that. And people were very, very reticent by peer pressure not to do university and continuous learning. But I think anybody knows that's a total load of rubbish, really. I mean, you've got to keep learning all through your life. And therefore, I think the whole idea of continuous education, particularly for adults and very mature adults like me in their 50s, 60s, and even 70s, is a very good thing. And I think also that lies with ed tech or educational technology. I think a lot of people are looking to use online courses. Reason I did Open University back in the 90s is because it was a distance learning. You can probably see over my shoulder, I've got a host of books that I used to send through once a week, and once a month, and work your way through the books. And I didn't ever go to, well, the only time I ever went to classes was the occasional tutorial, like once every 6 weeks, 6 months, in fact. But I enjoyed it because I could study in the morning or in the evenings, and at the time I was working away, I could study when I want. So I think this remote education type thing supported by technology is good. Another areas that other firms are also looking at within tech specifically is using technology to help not so much deliver the technology, but to support the technology. So not so much to deliver the education, but to support the education, like using machine learning techniques, NLP, to mark exam papers. For example, I notice when I'm an Open University lecturer, I have to mark probably about 80 assignments a year, and it's hard work, and when you've marked about 15 within a week, you actually think, God Almighty, you just see this going across your eyes, and you have to work your way through it, and you've got to be very thorough because you don't want to fail a student because you're tired or you make a mistake. So using things like, if you can get something like machine learning or NLP, or natural language processing, to help mark exam papers, that will be very, very good. And I did actually say I did four non-execs. I actually miscounted. I've actually do five. So the actual fifth one, I work for the Chartered Management Institute, which is a trade body in the UK. I know they've got offices in Hong Kong, and I think they've got set up in India, actually. I'm not 100% sure, actually. But it's probably mainly to support Indian firms who've got offices in London, to sort and the same way for Hong Kong. I think they used to have something in China. I may be wrong. Apologies if that's wrong. Is what happens is there's I used to be chair of the London and South East region for membership, so we look after all 35,000 or so members in London and South East of England. That is anyway, ensuring there was sufficient sort of like networking opportunities, training opportunities, events. We used to work with universities to support students. It's very much trying to spread the brand of good management. Because management is one of the strange things why it's incredibly important. You don't actually need to have any sort of qualification to do it. So if you're going to fly an aeroplane, you need a qualification. If you're going to probably do support Microsoft technology, you need the MCSE. Or if you want to do AWS cloud, you need to have the Amazon rubber stamp. And if you want to be a GP, you hopefully go to medical school. But for management, you can be managing all of those and you don't need any qualification. So the CMI runs a number of management courses that can tie in with degrees, but they also try and spread the ethics of good management, as well as things like being ethical, diversity, inclusion, stuff like that. So I did that chair role for up to was it 2013 to 2017? I think I did with 4 years and moved on. But the role I do for the Chartered Management Institute now is I work on the Management Book of the Year award. I'm one of the judges. So ultimately, what they do is they have a number of categories for books. So it could be textbook, technology book, pragmatic manager, future manager, etc. The actual structure really depends on the of what books come in, and basically us judges are assigned to one category, and we get 4 or 5 books to read over 3 weekends. We review them, sit around, have a bit of an argument, agree which one's the best, and that goes forward to the grand final. And then they have a series of boffins and PhD professors to actually work out the main management book of the year. But it's very, very good actually, because apart from the fact you feel quite good because you're trying very ethical and feel good for yourself, you're trying to spread the gospel of good management. You read all these books, as you can see behind me. I do like a read, and reading these books, you just learn a lot more from it. We don't always agree with everything that comes out, but you sometimes you need to sort of you can't keep reading with stuff you agree with. You just read with other stuff. And I guess the final sort of like non-exec role I do is I work for something called the Chartered Institute of Securities and Investment, CISI, which is the trade body for asset management or fund management in the UK. Again, they have offices in Malaysia, and I think they may have something in India as well. I can't remember off the top of my head. But I author 2 of their textbooks. One textbook's on corporate actions and dividends, which is a reasonably sort of bog standard piece of work. And the second book I author is something called Technology and Investment Management, where we just sort of work out all the technology that's used for trading desks, settlement desks, and looking at how how it works on a day-to-day basis. What it basically involves is every year we have a syllabus meeting. We go through the textbook and say, is the textbook still valid going forward? And that's a simple question. For things like corporate actions, you tend to find the only thing that's changed is using, actually, ironically, technology to try and improve the efficiency of processing or regulations to mitigate against risk. But the wider book, Technology and Investment Management, it does change quite a lot because there's always new technologies coming in. And as I mentioned earlier on educational technology, there's things like machine learning, artificial intelligence, big data, especially a lot of trading firms use big data to manage, basically to try and understand their client base and also to do their trading activities. Yeah, so therefore, while I said I did 4 non-exec roles, I actually need to learn to count. I actually do 6.
And you worked as an associate lecturer at the Open University, and you're working
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah. I'm doing that. I mean, I'm. It probably goes back to, I don't know if anybody who's ever going to be listening to this is about my age. Let's say very, very early 50s. I mean, is the Open University used to, back in the 70s, they were the first university who ever did distance learning fully in the UK, and everything was issued on over telly. And the only time they could actually ever watch telly to get time on the TV screens was sort of like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. So if you've been out for the night and you came on and you turn the telly on, you'll be sitting there watching the telly. Instead of watching like the highlights of England playing India at the Test match, you'd be watching somebody talking about geography or COBOL programming. So basically, Open University had a sort of like a strange cult following in the UK. People used to come in from the pub and go and watch the Open University and have no idea what they were following. So therefore, when I got to about 25, I wanted to take some proper management training, and a number of people recommended that I should do an MBA. And then when I looked at a number of the MBA courses that were being offered, let's say the more bricks and mortar university, let's call them that, it was basically, apart from the fact I was working full time, I couldn't afford to take the time off. And so what I decided, and then somebody recommended, why do you look at the Open University? And bear in mind, I still thought it was coming home from the pub 2 o'clock in the morning, watching strange programs at night. So I went to up in, I don't know if you know London, Liverpool Street, which is a big station in London. There's a big hotel next to it. They did an open evening. So I went down there and spoke to the guys, and I thought, this is really good, the Open University. I really, really like this. So I ended up doing an MBA through them between 96 and 90. In fact, I got my results just before the year 2000, actually. That was my aim, to get it done before the world ended after Y2K. So I did the Open University through that. And the reason I did the Open University is that I just like the fact it's very modular. So you can pick the modules. And if you get after a module and something happens, because by the time I was working long hours, I was just I had 2 young children at the time. If you had issues, you could just delay the next module, and just move on and on. So basically, what I did at the end, I just went all the way through. That was non-event. So I finished it, and after that, I was really such a big fan of the Open University, and I was actually quite inspired, always wanted to work for them. Then sort of life moved on, and I ended up working for a derivative trader about 2008. And what happened was they used a massive amount of technology, and it was way, way, way above my knowledge level. I mean, so I spoke to my boss and said, look, I'm struggling sometimes with this technology. What do you recommend? So I didn't speak to my boss. I spoke to an industry colleague who said, I'm struggling with this, and he said, have you thought about doing an open university course? And I thought, despite the fact I did nearly 3 years at the Open University on an MBA, I didn't even thought about it. So I ended up doing another degree in web technology with the Open University. Again, because it was modules. I did the first module, thought I like this, I'll do the next one. And before you do it, you're halfway through the degree, you think, I might as well do another year and a bit and finish it. So I managed to get myself a degree in web technology. And then around about coming up to sort of a bit nearer now, actually, for my life story here, about when was it? About 2017. I saw an advert. I mean, I was on their sort of like their job list. They were sent around they had vacancies, and a lot of the were either a lot of the vacancies. Either I didn't have the right skill set. They were looking for somebody to do nursing or engineering, and that's just I don't know anything about that. Then they said they were running this new course, which has got a fantastic name, 2M T254, managing IT, the why, the what, and the how. And I thought I'll apply for it. And then out of the blue, they came back and said, we like your CV. Can we have an interview? So you do an interview, and it's not that dissimilar to this. They sort of ask you a lot of scenario type questions. If a student was doing this, what would you do? If a student did that, what would you do? And you just answer the questions. And then they also gave you a mock sort of like assignment to mark, or two mock assignments to mark. You can do it. And then suddenly, next thing I knew, they said, well, you can start. And this was sort of like on the Wednesday. And they said, oh, and by the way, because of various odds and sods, you're going to have to be ready for Monday. So it wasn't too bad, actually, because, I went through it. And I've been running a tutor associate lecturing on that course for, I think now is the fourth running, which has been very, very therapeutic. I really enjoy it, I must admit, because even though I know most of the course material, there's certain bits about ITIL and data modeling that you just don't know. So obviously you need to pick it up and learn it quite quickly. I think the bit I enjoy the most is, there's two bits one enjoy. One is sort of like getting a nice thank you message from a student when they pass. That's quite nice. You think, oh, I've made a difference. Yeah, someone loves me. And the second thing is actually marking the assignments. Because one of the things you're asked to do is a lot of the assignments asked from your own experience, tell me about a technology problem you've had. And you get the most fantastic different wide range of answers from that. And the first answers, most people complain about changing internet providers. So that seems to be the most stressful thing in the world. But I've had people who've talked about, they've had a ship that's broke away from an oil rig, and the anchor started dragging along the bottom of the sea in the North Sea, which is sort of like that between England and Scotland and Norway, been dragging across, and it's actually been pulling up the internet cables that go between mainland Europe and the UK, and all the problems. You suddenly think, oh my God, that could wipe out half, the north side of the UK and things like that. So it's a really enjoyable thing, and I must admit, I am, as you probably hopefully picked up from the initial chat, I'm very into self development and everything, and even by teaching, you really do understand it. And there's a very famous person called Richard Feynman, who you may not know, but I do. It's spelled Richard, as in Richard, Feynman, who was a Nobel lecturer, Nobel Prize winner. He's a US guy who was part of the 1986 Challenger space shuttle disaster review panel. And he says, if you want to learn a subject in a lot of detail, then teach it. And that's probably the most truthful saying I've heard. Yeah. So apart from the fact it allows me to put back in, I learn a hell of a lot more than you think you do. It forces you to learn it, and it's also good when people actually feel that you've made a difference to somebody's life.
And what is that particular thing that you learned as a lecturer?
I think the thing about the lecturing is, I think one of the things you've learned about lecturing is how to. I mean, obviously you've got the technical aspects of learning about the course, which I've sort of spoken before. But I think let's say the non-tech, let's say that I think us Brits call it the softer side, which is the human side, as opposed to the technical side, is you've learned to deal with people with different issues, different cultures, because you will you get students who've got personal issues, maybe they've actually got medical issues, whether they're physically medical or mental issues. So you know, a lot of the training we get at the Open University is around dealing with different types of student challenges. You'll have, I mean, for example, I've had students who work shift times. You know, so they can only get do their study in the evening or in the morning. I think it's very, very good. It helps you deal with different types of people, different types of scenarios. I think it makes you more open to other people's problems. Because in the old days it'd be a case of, oh, for God's sake, just get on with it. We're sort of moaning type of attitude. But now when you think of people, you ask them problems, you think, okay, that's a big issue. And also the other thing is also one of the other things I'm quite like doing is actually working with the students on particular problems. It's quite nice when a student comes to you and because the Open University are supposed to learn on their own, but they are allowed to come to you with various questions. They might come to you and say things like, I don't understand entity modeling. Can you explain it to me? And you sit there and go through it, and then you suddenly see the paper comes in for the essay and they've done a good score. And you actually think, yeah, yeah, yeah. Obviously, I can't tell them the answers, but you suddenly feel, they've done a good job, actually. It's very good on the human side, yeah.
And uh, you are into director position from last 14 years. So at Try Down Limited. So how is this in this long time? What?
Yeah, well, Try Down is what is a personal services company. I mean, ultimately, it's a consultancy company just for me. The way it works is it's a I say so tax efficient way. Well, not it wasn't. It was anyway a tax efficient way of setting yourself up as an individual. So if I had a consultancy client, so for example, my first consultancy client was BP. Who were the big oil company, and I'm sure they've got British Petroleum as they were in the old days. They would engage with BP. Sorry, they would employ Try Down to do a piece of work, and then Try Down would employ me to do it. And the idea is it was just to ensure that it was the most efficient manner of getting paid and stuff like that. It's more of a logistic efficiency, I suppose, to anything else. But through Try Down, I've done quite a large amount of work actually. My very first project was BP, as I mentioned earlier. That was back in 2007. I worked with them. They were as an oil company. I was brought in. It was only a 3-month assignment, but I enjoyed it immensely. Actually, it was as an interim IT manager on their derivative trading desk. I never actually really got to the bottom of it. My predecessor left, and I was brought in almost to steady the ship, to use a horrible phrase, while they looked to recruit another manager. Once I did that, I worked for a company called Hermes, not the travel company or the delivery company, but they were actually part of the British Telecom Pension Scheme. So Hermes were going through a major reorganisation, and they were looking to restructure the pension scheme in a dramatic way, and I was brought in to help to do that. And that again was very, very interesting because I've never worked for a pension scheme of that size. I mean, you're talking, I don't know, £500 billion worth of money. So you're talking serious amounts of money. So it was like, wow, look at all the figures look at all the zeros on this piece of paper that's going across. I'm trying to work my way through and things like that. But again, it's very good experience. And again, I met a lot of interesting people and learned a hell of a lot. I was only there for there just under 18 months, give or take a week. But I learned so much money. After that, I worked for a company called, was actually the Financial Services Authority, which is now the Financial Conduct Authority, which is the UK regulator. And that was a very, very, very interesting place I worked because it was a number of things. Once it was about 2009 to 2010. It was after the credit crunch, but obviously some of the UK banks contributed to it, and it caused all sorts of hassle. So the project I was doing was around liquidity management, which is ensuring the banks and financial firms had enough money in their banks to run. So it was very high profile, which made it very interesting and very, very challenging, and I learned a lot. And secondly, the FCA, it's a weird thing. I was probably on telly more times on the FCA project than I've ever been in my whole life. Because what was the FCA, they always had newspapers reporters outside there, or television reporters outside there, and always seemed to be at lunchtime. So every time there was on the news, I look in the evening and I see myself walking down to the sandwich shop and coming back again. So there was no hiding that I was taking a long lunch or anything like that. And also, it was very good because we'll often get political visitors come to talk to us, like the Chancellor of Exchequer and other senior politicians, to talk about strategy and problems. So apart from the fact it was very, very good learning all about liquidity, and it was a very complex technology system. It was actually developed out in India. I think Capgemini and a few other firms worked on it. It was also very, very good understanding some of the bigger political issues that the UK were facing. After that, I worked for a firm called Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, working on a general ledger implementation. Again, it was a very, very interesting project. Again, I learned more about accounting. I probably did in 6 months I was there than I probably worked previous 35 years of my whole life doing that. After that, I worked at another big bank, or the investment was actually Scottish Widows or Lloyds Banking Group. As you may remember, you probably don't remember, you're far too young, but for those of a certain age may remember, Lloyds was forced to merge with another UK bank during the credit crunch to stop one of the banks going collapsing. And when they merged together, the whole thing was that they were literally put together overnight by the UK government, and then there was lots of work to merge the operating models, the branches, the technology platforms, HR systems, people, employment contracts, and I worked on a piece of work that was there to merge the back end systems, which was very good actually. Again, spent most of it driving around the UK, which I didn't expect, but wasn't the end of the world. And I worked, and that was very interesting because again, you learn a lot. You just learn a lot. You learn a lot about dealing with massive technology infrastructures. I mean, things like rolling out technology and process changes to 15,000 branches over a weekend. Which basically means if you get it wrong, it's a complete and utter disaster. So that was very, very good. After that, I worked at a very small firm, actually. In fact, they're so small, you could probably fit them in this room, actually. And this room's not that big. It was a very small FX trading firm. It was a firm that it was based in London, actually. But I used to do a lot of trading for UK firms who had overseas offices, or overseas firms that had UK offices where they needed regular FX trades to be done. So, for example, you may actually have a firm. Let's say, one of the typical client could be something like a consultancy in the UK where most of the work's done in India. So all the revenue is coming into the UK, but you need to transfer the money to India to pay for salaries and buildings and bonuses and other stuff. And you want to try, and roughly how much money's coming in, but you want to try and book the best FX rate going as far forward as you can do to make sure even a 0.5% movement over after several months you end up losing money. So what this firm did was they used to do commercial forward FX trading, which was very good. I was brought in as the firm had gone through a growth spurt, and their operating models and the inner workings was struggling. They're literally their operating model was designed for so many trades, but they had exceeded that dramatically, and therefore that they wanted somebody to come in to review the operating model. And I just came in and basically just mapped out some processes to say, you need to change this, you need to implement controls in here, you need to have regular review points, etc., which was very interesting. Then I worked for a large US. Well, it was actually when I started, it was a UK fund manager. By the time I left, it was a US fund manager. There's a takeover, working on a massive outsourcing deal. Particularly in the UK, there was a tendency to outsource everything to financial services like accounting, trading, reconciliations, bookkeeping. Most of that got outsourced to what are American firms, who then had subsidiaries in India and Poland, Malaysia, even Australia and New Zealand, excuse me, in South Africa occasionally, to move all the operations there. So it was a big job to try and work on a project to move everything out to what was an American firm, although most of the liaison was with people in India and Malaysia and Poland. After that, I worked another, probably the third UK largest pension fund. Again, it's very similar to the BT one. This was British Rail, or British Transport Fund. Again, very similar to the British Telecom project. They'd worked on a number of different issues. They was having a few problems, and they were looking to do every 3 years. They do a review of the pension plan, and I was brought in to help with the work to change that. And a few other projects. I'm conscious of time. Is I worked for another bank doing an outsourcing deal, and then primarily since that I've worked on probably 3 or 4 main projects across 3 or 4 different clients. I think one of them was a rather small initiative. I've always got to be very careful how I describe this. Don't call Brexit, which is where the UK left the EU. I mean, personally, I think it's an absolute disastrous decision the UK made, but fortunately, that's democracy. You get what the people want, not what they vote for. So I've been doing a lot of Brexit work recently. I mean, hand holding some companies and working with companies on the way through with that. There's also been a lot of outsourcing work going on at the moment. You know, that's still the UK are looking to outsource more and more to different areas. I mean, India is still very, very popular, but they're looking at, I mean, China's becoming more popular at the moment, although there's often the technical issues there. They're even looking to outsource certain areas to Southern America or even the United States, but some of the low-cost areas of the United States, some of they call it the central states, you know, where the salaries and the costs aren't so high. And the other projects I probably did, which is probably one of the most interesting ones, I opened up a new office in Milan. I set up a new asset management firm in Milan, which is the top of Italy, just before you get the Swiss border, right at the very, very top. And that was very interesting because I had to set up the physical office. Well, I didn't actually set it up. We negotiated with a landlord to negotiate an office, which is all very interesting because I didn't speak a word of Italian and the guys didn't really speak much English. So and the landlord actually spoke French, so that was a very interesting negotiation just to make sure everything was fine. We had to recruit staff out there, move staff out there, all the regulatory approvals and all the operating models. The only big change was we were due to do a massive office opening party, and I was quite looking forward to my trip to Milan. But what happened was COVID hit. So while the office was open, none of us could travel out there, and unfortunately, I've moved on, so I probably lost my chance to have a nice trip to Milan. But otherwise, the most of the other work I've been doing on my try down type work is primarily around UK regulations in financial services, because that's the most growth area. I think generally about regulations. I think some. Excuse me, hiccups. Somebody mentioned to me that regulation is probably the biggest growth area in financial services at the moment. Uh, so therefore, I can imagine I'll be working on that going forward. Sorry, that's it. Sorry.
And you also worked as you're working as a director at Red Card Gambling Support Project that you said.
Yeah, doing red card as well. That's the one I mentioned earlier on, who's the soccer or football player, depending if you're American or not, who lost a lot of his money. And it's more on, we call it gambling support, but it's really more around gambling awareness, to say, be aware that if you're on, as I said before, if you're experiencing some of these issues, then you may have a problem. If you experience some of these issues, then you could have a problem. If you experience some of these issues, then you probably do have a problem. So, and again, we work through schools, local councils, housing associations, to try and spread the message of awareness. The idea is prevention is better than cure.
Great. And you are into Chartered Management Institute.
Yeah, that's the one I mentioned earlier, the CMI, where I was the chair of the body between 2013 and 2017. Membership engagement, 30 odd thousand members in London and the southeast of England, and where I also work on the Management Book of the Year award, because you may notice I do like a good read.
You worked as an external specialist.
Yes, that's the Chartered Institute of Security and Investment. That's the one I work. Yeah. That's good. I enjoy that. As I mentioned before, that is because I primarily do a lot of my work in financial services. I mean, when I spoke, I should have mentioned this earlier. One of the good things about it is that it gives me a significant amount of technical experience, by writing these books and getting access to these textbooks. If I'm doing a piece of work and I don't really understand a certain area of the industry, I can get a copy of the relevant textbook. That doesn't always tell the answers, but it gives you some indication. So, yeah.
And you worked as a project manager at Vanguard for 2 years.
Yes, and that's the project I've literally just finished. Actually, I was there for about 2.5 years. A really, really immensely enjoyable time. Vanguard. Vanguard themselves are I think they're the second biggest asset manager in the world. I think probably, and which is, I don't know how much money they got, but it's in the trillions. If you write it down, you have to try and work out how many zeros they are. and I worked in their UK office, and that was extremely, really, really enjoyed my time there. And I did a number of things there. As I mentioned earlier, I did Brexit. That was probably the main reason I was brought in, was to do Brexit. Was only supposed to be, I think Brexit was supposed to go live about 4 months after I left. I don't know if you know the history of Brexit. It's a bit of a political fireball at the moment. Well, it was then, and it got pushed back, and it got pushed back, and it got pushed back, and finally it all came to fruition. In I think it was the 31st of December 2020, so a year and a third ago. So I did a lot of work just to ensure that Vanguard were, basically were prepared to do Brexit, and ensure there were controls if they had to do any legal changes, procedural changes, regulatory changes. And it covered many areas, such as looking after staffing contracts, because you had a lot of people in the UK who were EU residents, so you want to make sure that they were comfortable. Any selling into the EU, client servicing, trading operations. It was a very interesting project because it almost cut across the whole company. It was very, very interesting. Also, I mean, that was the other project. One of the other big projects I did there was around opening a new office in Milan, which I mentioned earlier. I did that for Vanguard. That was very, very interesting. And it's a nice bunch of people I work with at Vanguard on that project in particular. I also is that as you mentioned, financial services makes heavy use of outsourcing stuff. As I mentioned, obviously a lot of it ends up in India via US subsidiaries, and also it's not so much that they also use things like cloud computing, software packages, whether they are supplied or run over over the cloud, something like that. They also use a lot of infrastructure. They also use things like internet connections as well. So one of the things the regulators, particularly in the UK and the EU, were worried about is how reliant firms were on outsourcers, on suppliers. To say ultimately, if a supplier fails, your firm could fail. And the answer is, in some cases, well, yes. And what you tend to find is most firms use the same sort of suppliers. For example, it'd be surprising if you worked out all your suppliers and you suppliers, and you suppliers, you'll find out how many of them actually will use Microsoft, or how many of them use AWS, or how many use Azure, or how many use British Telecom for their communications. So if there was a major outage in one of those suppliers, it would impact. You can imagine the ripple effect for all these suppliers would be quite significant. So what it required is a lot of firms to put in controls and contingencies and practices in to try and manage the outsourcing arrangements you had in place. Again, that was again incredibly interesting project because you ended up learning about every single supplier or outsourced the firm used. And that was everything from the key suppliers who provide trading to key suppliers who provide the operations or the technology infrastructure, down to the people, the landlords of the buildings, down to the coffee machine providers, down to the caterers. Again, it's a bit similar to Brexit in a way, where it was almost like a slice across the entire company to make a change. Again, so I finished back with Vanguard back in when did I finish? End of November last year, actually. So and since then, as I mentioned earlier, I've been slowly trying to complete those 2 books.
And you're also managing the project and Insight Investment.
Insight, yes, that was actually before. I forgot about that actually when I was going through my things. That was before I joined Vanguard. That was sort of like June 2018 to April 2019. I was brought in again to do a number of, basically again, I was brought in to work on something called MiFID II project. MiFID II, for the love of me, I can't remember what it stands for, but it stands for something Marketing in Financial something Directive. It was an absolute sledgehammer of new regulation that came in for January 2018 in financial services. It was primarily triggered by a lot of the credit crunch that came out in 2008, 2009 to put far more controls around firms, asset management firms, to basically make sure they don't, another credit crunch doesn't happen, to be honest with you. I mean, put the cut to the line. And a lot of firms to implement MiFID II had to basically do a lot of interim operations changes to get ready by the go live date, so they could get over the go live date regulation, and they had like day 2 projects to sort of bed everything in and what have you. And I was brought in to do insights, sort of MiFID 2 day 2 project, and again that was very interesting. Again, working at a different firm is always interesting. You meet you know, even if you do the same project at a different firm, different ways of working, different ways of work, different procedures, different people, and you learn quite a lot. And it was primarily around things like reporting, trading, execution, and client reporting. Yeah, again, very interesting. Yeah, and I think the one price that you
And
might be coming on. Yeah, so go ahead. So I'll cut across you. Mm.
yeah, BMO Global Asset Management.
Yeah, BMO Global Asset Management. I actually, as I mentioned earlier, MiFID II came live in 2018, January 2018. I was actually the MiFID II implementation project program manager, we want to call it, for MiFID II for BMO GAM. So I joined them in December 2016. And worked for them to about April 2018, and then obviously went on to Insight directly after that. And that was actually to ensure that BMO GAN were ready for MiFID II in January 2018. Again, it was a massive project, incredibly enjoyable. And again, it's one of these projects I do like doing, is because it was, again, it's cut almost, because the regulation was so wide and complex, and fiddly, to use a horrible phrase, it cut across the whole of the organisation. So it covered everything from, you know, lots of changes to the way we worked. We as in BMO worked with clients, changes to products, investment trading. You know, the buyers and I mean, the guys on the phones doing the trade, and how there was a lot of changes they needed to do, a lot of changes to reporting to clients because they had to be much more transparent about the fees and the costs. Much more stricter on how record keeping. You know, there was very strict rules that you had to keep records for so many years, and to be able to obtain them very quickly. Previously, people used to keep records, print them off, put them in a brown box, and send them to a safe in the middle of nowhere, and it would take weeks to get them back. But I think the regulator changed the rules that I need to turn them back within a couple of hours. Various sort of like supporting them, and also the best bit I liked about BMO GAM was that they had lots of different offices around Europe at the time. So as well as implementing MiFID II for the UK office, you had to implement it for the offices in mainland Europe and the various sales offices, which adds an interesting an interesting dimension to it, which again basically means you just keep on learning stuff as well. And that was a full-on project, I must admit. It was very hard work, but very enjoyable. Again, it was a nice place to work, and there were and learnt a hell of a lot. So,
And you also worked as project manager at UBS Asset Management.
yeah, UBS is the asset management arm of the bank UBS. I think it stands for Union Bank of Switzerland, although they go by the word UBS. They had a number. They have a thing called transfer agency, um, um, and they did a thinking out loud here. Well, they had just basically two systems that need to two outsourcing arrangements across two banks that need to be merged onto one, but with a tight deadline. And I just worked with the teams and the operation teams on that. Really, it was a very different project, say, to some of the other ones. Even though it was reasonably high profile, there's only about 3 or 4 people working on it, so it's quite a close, knit team, almost like a skunk works type approach, working very closely, very, very long hours, very, very interesting. And we worked on that all the way through to completion. Again, very interesting. And obviously, when I left UBS, I joined them in November 2015. I left in August 2016, and worked and then moved on to BMO GAM a couple of months after that, after I took had a summer break.
And you worked as a project manager at RPMI,
Yeah,
Railpen.
RPMI. Railpen is the British Rail Pension Scheme, which I mentioned earlier. Actually, I think the official name is RPMI. Well, it was at the time anyway. But most people in the industry called them Railpen. As I mentioned earlier, we were working on a project to do some restructuring to the pension fund and the way it was operated on all. Again, it was very similar to when I worked at the Hermes or the British Telecom Pension Scheme. where we worked on a sort of like trading, restructuring the way the scheme works. This was part of like a 3-year annual review of the scheme that happens by the external auditors, and they will review it and they'll come out with a long list of do this, do that, don't do this, do that. And I was brought in to help make that happen. So.
And you worked as consultant associate at Columbia Threadneedle Investments.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier. That was Threadneedle Asset Management. I think I mentioned earlier. Who, when I joined, were actually just Threadneedle Asset Management, and I joined them in March 2013. Again, they merged. Well, merged. They were taken over by a company called Columbia in America. And they then become Columbia Threadneedle Asset Management. Yeah, I mean, so basically, when I joined, they were UK. When I left, they were US. Although nothing to do with me. And I just worked on, as I mentioned before, they were doing a massive outsourcing deal. They had a number of different outsourcing providers that were using across custody, transfer agency, fund accounting, and they were looking for the basically to move on to a single provider. So I sort of helped with that really. I mean, I think the project was still ongoing when I left, mainly because the bit I was working on came to an end. But you know, again, very enjoyable, nice people to work with, and very, very interesting. So,
You worked as consultant at First Rate FX for 1 month.
yeah, yeah, I did that actually. I mean, that's the as I mentioned earlier, that was the very small FX trader I worked with. They'd gone effectively they'd almost outgrown their operating model. They'd done an absolutely amazing development and growth in their business model. And I was brought in to just to try and see, you know, what short term or well, basically what immediate and maybe even longer term improvements to the operating model could be made to basically to ensure that the operating model can support the business volumes effectively. You know, I think the operating models were designed for a number of trades, and they'd exceeded that quite considerably. And therefore, it was just sitting down with all the. Again, it's a very, very small team. As I mentioned earlier, you could probably fit them in this room. There's probably about 20 or 30 people in the whole. Well, at the time, there's only 20 or 30 people in the whole company. And we did some work. We went through and worked through various workflows, control points, and agreed what needs to change. It was actually quite a good therapeutic project in a way because you know you felt because you're working with the whole company together, everybody was pulling together in the same direction. I mean, there were some people who said, well, we don't need all these controls, but when you sometimes to say, well, if you don't have these controls in place and the trade goes wrong and you have to reverse the trade out, it could cost you £5,000. You know, you can't do that. You maybe can get away with it once, but if you do it 3 or 4 times, you're talking like £20,000 loss, which is not very good because it comes out the bottom line. Again, it was only there. I was there, even though you said a month, I was probably there about 3 weeks. But again, very good. Enjoyed it immensely. Yeah. But again, I learned a lot about FX trading and much more than I did before I joined. And I also felt, you know, hopefully I brought some worthwhile experience to them. So.
And you worked as a consultant at Lloyd's Banking Group.
Lloyd's, yeah, I mean Lloyd's Bank was, as I mentioned before, this was under the credit crunch in 2008, or maybe it was even 2009. The UK Bank of England, who's like the overseer of everything financial wise in the UK, forcefully merged Lloyd's Bank with Halifax Bank of Scotland. I think Halifax Bank of Scotland was struggling to survive with lack of liquidity, and the UK just literally, I mean, the regulator just squashed them together and said, "You are now one." But there was no sort of like when you do any merger, there's always a due diligence and a planning exercise to try and align clients and operating models and branches and distributions and manufacturing and all that sort of marketing and branding. This was literally done over. I say, well, it's probably done longer than a weekend, but it seemed like 1 minute they were separate and the next day they were merged. But while they'd merged, they were effectively still 2 banks running completely separately. So there was a number of initiatives to try and obviously bring everything together, and that covered everything from merging the branches to merging the the marketing materials to merging the staffing, which obviously meant redundancies. And I worked on the one of the subsidiaries that looked after all their investment clients. And effectively, you had the old, the newly acquired, inverted commas, HBOS, Halifax Bank of Scotland client base. and the existing Lloyds Bank systems, and we just needed to merge them together. So I was brought in to manage that, or help with that. Well, to manage it, there was a lot wider project than me. It was actually help to merge them all together. And that was very, very, very interesting. Again, I learned a lot about corporate dynamics of mergers, which I must admit are not always obvious. You know, build a recruitment of new staff. Fortunately, there was a large number, a number of redundancies had to be made. Working our way through that, and also managing sort of like large projects and large number of stakeholders. So I think I learned a lot. It was a very good experience for me personally, and hopefully Lloyd's enjoyed it as well. I learned a lot of stuff around sort of what I call technical skills, but also a large amount of soft skills.
And you worked as a implementation and a project manager at RBS Global Banking and Markets, 2011.
Yep. Yeah, that was 2011, October 2010 to April 2011. So you're talking about 10 years ago now, over 10 years ago. Well, doesn't seem like that. I actually worked on the banking side, the global banking side, which is an investment bank, which is like the corporate bank. For those of a certain age, we used to call it merchant banking. The Lloyds Bank were looking to it, well, or have now implemented a new general ledger system. They wanted a general ledger system that was far more real-time updated, so they can manage their liabilities to make sure, where they've got, who owes them money, how much money they owe, how much money is in the bank, as well as a host of other things. The software was pretty much developed when I arrived, and my role was just to try and integrate everything together. To roll it forward, to go forward. Again, I just completed one of the initial phases of that project, and for various reasons, I moved on to something else. But again, it was as I think I mentioned earlier when we was chatting, I probably learnt more about accounting in the 6 months I was there. How it actually works in the real world than I probably did with God knows how much reading textbooks in my youth. So.
And you worked as project manager at Financial Services Authority for 1 year.
Yeah, I was there. It was just over a year, just under a year less a week, actually, I think, actually. As I mentioned before, the Financial Services Authority is now called the Financial Conduct Authority. That is very much the UK regulator. I was brought in actually from an old person, my old manager actually brought me in actually when my old manager from Mellon Bank brought me in to work under her. So that was obviously quite nice, working her on what was called the new liquidity reporting regime. So what the regulator wanted all firms or financial services firms who could perform financial service activity in the UK. So they weren't just UK firms; they could be American firms, European firms. Bank of India was one of them. Bank of Ceylon there was another firm. They had to provide regular updates on how much money they've got on their bank, how much money they're owed, and how much money they owe to other people. And what allowed the financial services to do is these fees, which are sometimes daily for some of the bigger banks, will come in, and they could actually model this to work out, do we think that Bank A owes so much money to everybody else? If Bank A has a problem, then it could cause a major issue across the industry. And that was a very interesting piece of work. So I was brought in ultimately to manage something called Gabriel, which stands for gathering better regulatory information electronically, which is like a web system that all financial service firms have to put their returns onto. And we put that on, and then basically what we developed a number of sort of like API screens and or input screens where on a regular, as and when required, banks would enter. We have X million pound owed to us from him, and Y million pounds owed to them, and we've got this amount of money on the bank statement at the moment, and that will go through, and then it will be sent to a back screen system, who would then do the modelling. And if the regulator thought we're very worried that if Bank A fails, then it will cause a systematic problem. At least they're on the front foot to go to that bank and say, we're worried, you need to do something, or can we help you do something to try and mitigate the risk? So.
And you worked as consultant at Navigant Consulting for 2 months.
Yeah, I did Navigant. Unfortunately, the client who I work with, I'm under strict NDA or non-disclosure agreement on that, so I can't say much about them. But I was there for about 3 or 4 weeks actually, and I actually got the role through a colleague I worked at Hermes. Actually, he recommended me to Navigant, and I was brought in to help a fund manager who was probably like the startup stage. Again, those startup firms are quite enjoyable to work with because they're so dynamic and got so much energy. They wanted to create a new sort of like product vehicle that they could market to all their clients. And really, there was two main areas. There's either you could either run the vehicle out of Luxembourg, or you could run them out of Dublin. The advantage of Luxembourg is it's quite, at the time, it was quite a mature market, had a large number of vehicles. The advantage of Dublin, even though it wasn't as mature, it was there's a lot of cultural differences with the UK. They both speak English, they're the same time zone. There's millions of Irish people in England and what have you and what have you. So there's a lot of overlap. And the recommendation was I just worked through very much like almost like a cause and effect type analysis to come up with well, I didn't actually come up with a single recommendation. I come up with a long list of if you went down the Luxembourg routes, then this is the advantages, but you have to be aware of this. And if you go down the Dublin route, then this is the advantages, and you need to be aware of that. So, and that was handed over, and obviously I can't tell you what they decided to do, but they took a route, and it was once they made that decision, my time was over.
Great. And you worked as a consultant and project manager at Helms Fund Managers.
Hermes, yeah, Hermes, and that was as I mentioned earlier, the British Telecom Pension Scheme. I think Hermes were the manager of the British Telecom's pension scheme. So the words British Telecom Pension Scheme and Hermes are often used interchangeably at the time in the industry, sometimes incorrectly, but it was what it was. Yeah, so I did. That was a very interesting project, actually. I was there for about 18 months, give or take a week or so, and that was really, really interesting. So I did a large amount of outsourcing for them, actually, or they looked to move a large amount of their activity actually to Dublin offshore vehicle to gain tax efficiencies and marketability. And obviously, which is very similar to the one I did at Navigant later on. Actually, it was a very similar sort of piece of work, which is probably why I got the gig. And there was some various other reconstructions I worked on the pension fund, trying to change the way the cash processing worked, how the custody worked, and also implementing some new client reporting functionality. I must admit, that was a particularly enjoyable project. Actually, it was a very it was one of these projects that was genuinely busy. I mean, a lot of firms talk about business transformation type projects, and a lot of it's just a little bit of spin to give the impression they're doing something far more glamorous than they're actually doing. But I honestly thought this was a very good business transformation project, and I think when we'd finished the project work after 18 or so months, even though when I finished the project went on for about another maybe 9 months afterwards on other phases, I think the company was in a hell of a better place than it was before we joined. Well, I personally did. Probably have to ask them. Yeah.
And software delivery lead and manager at BP.
Yeah, BP or British Petroleum, the oil company, amongst other things. Again, there was my first proper contract piece of work, consultancy piece of work, actually. I was brought in September 2007 as like an interim IT manager type thing. The predecessor had left for some reason. I never actually found out the reason. I must admit, I didn't really pry because I didn't want to interfere. And I was literally brought in for 3 months to steady the ship because they didn't have a manager, while BP seniors management decided who to recruit for a permanent role. So what I enjoyed about it the most was it was working in a slightly different industry, because oil and gas is slightly different to financial services, although lots of similarities how you buy and sell it. It's all done over the phone. It's all done via sort of like XML messaging and sort of like integrated systems. But I learned a lot of, and obviously I think the biggest challenge there and the learning curve for me there was very much around inheriting a team of 20 people, trying to calm them all, because obviously they were very nervous about what's happening. There was lots of rumours going around, and as well as calming them, is sort of like make sure the department still churns forward as it should do and deliver what it needs to do, or not as it needs to do. And then when the new manager was recruited, to do a handover with them. So it was actually a very, very action-packed 3 months, but it was actually very, very, very interesting. Yeah. Mm.
And you worked as a software product manager at CMC Markets for
Yeah,
10 months.
Sims. Yeah, CMC Markets was a derivatives trader. They did contracts for difference. The Yeah, I was brought in again. CMC Markets was an amazing place to work. To be honest with you, it was so the growth of the company was almost like a vertical curve. You know, it was expanding. Like it was massive growth. Very, very, very nice place to work. And I was brought in as to set up a new team actually to look after two or three new areas that they wanted to enhance. Most of the technology had previously been based around things like payments and trading systems and what have you, and stuff like that. Not payments, trading and mobile apps and web apps and Java apps and what have you. But what I was asked to do was set up a system that would look at sort of like managing the client lists, because I had lots and lots of clients, but they weren't. But they just wanted like nowadays it's mainstream like CRM type system. So I worked on that. And I also looked at implementing a system for around payments, you know, the ability to take credit card payments and credit card refunds and what have you. Again, it was very interesting. I learned a lot about derivative trading. And this was, as you may recall earlier on when we were chatting, this is the area I spoke to regarding when I did the Open University course on web technology. This is the area when I went into here, I was struggling with the technology, ended up doing that course. But yeah, I left after 18 months for a number of personal reasons, actually. But and then we obviously went to BP almost the weekend after. But otherwise, it was good. Enjoyed it. Good learning exercise. Mm.
And you worked as associate director and consultant at Mutual Fund Technologies.
Yeah, Mutual Fund Technology was a subsidiary of Fidelity Investments. You may know a large investment management firm. What they did was they had an in-house system called GFAT, which did like well, it was like a share register or transfer agency to give its real name. But because the system was so powerful and so functionally rich and so good, they used to sell it to its competitors. And obviously they didn't want to sell it through the Fidelity name because people would be very nervous. So they've set up a subsidiary called Mutual Fund Technologies to sell it. So basically, what it was working. They had about 5 or 6, and these are quite large clients. You know, you're talking at one point they must have had over 60% of the market. Working with these large clients to sell the or not sell, but yeah, I suppose it was to sell the system to these clients. I didn't get involved in the sales process because basically a lot of the clients were on board when I joined, but I did a lot of work with them with working through client consultancy enhancements, process improvements. So again, it was very good. It was a very hands-on role working with clients, and very therapeutic. Again, when you realise that you've made a difference. But yeah, but they are there for about 2 years, actually 2 years to the day almost. Yeah.
And you worked as IT development manager at Melon European Fund Services.
Yeah, but Mellon European Fund Services, they were in anything almost like a competitor of sorts to Mutual Fund Technologies, or they're not a direct of sorts, I say. I worked there from 2 years, nearly 3 years actually, from March 2002 to December 2004. I When I joined Mellon European Fund Services, it was actually a merger of Newton Investments, which is a bit further down the CV list, and various other parts of Mellon. They brought everything together. And I was brought in as the overall IT manager to manage the integration across everything. So I managed the integration of the people, the systems, uh, across transfer agency and fund accounting. So it was a very, very interesting process because obviously was very important for the business that technology works. So it had the double-edged sword of having a lot of high-profile attention from the senior management, which is good, A, because they gave you lots and lots of time, but B, they were often want to know what was happening with progress. So it's, having this attention is always a double-edged sword. And secondly, there was obviously a large technical aspect as well. And thirdly, there was a very good, firstly, I learned a lot about managing people through that because apart from the fact that I had to manage a team of over 90 odd people spread around the UK and Dublin, there was also a large amount of elements of working with under trying to understand. We had to outsource quite a lot of the work to India, actually. It's probably the first time I worked with a major outsourcing. So there was the transition effort, which obviously you got one element of is the technical aspects of ensuring the Indian software firm is fully up to speed with the technology, understands the technology, and can actually develop and support it. And the second hand is the staff in the UK, and some of them unfortunately had to lose their jobs and were made redundant. And obviously, which left a bad taste for some of the people who were left behind. Therefore, it was a case of working with them to try and working through the process. So it was a very, from a pure personal point of view, very selfish point of view, a very, very good development curve. But I think for some of the other individuals involved who lost their job or their jobs changed or they lost their friends, they may not see it the same as I did. So,
And you worked as IT development manager at Melon Global Investors for 3 years, four
yeah,
months.
yeah. October 9. Then we're going back to last century now. October 98 to February 2002. I worked again. Mellon Global Investors was virtually a part of Mellon that used to sell Mellon's investment products into mainland Europe. And the UK. So a lot of the technology was around sort of like managing clients, marketing, client servicing, distribution, running marketing campaigns. So we implemented a large number of different systems and technologies and worked closely with a wide range of businesses to do that. Again, that was a very exciting time actually. Apart from obviously the technical and the people challenges of running a large team on a big thing, the company itself was growing quite well and they were selling a lot. They were on a upward trend. If you remember, 99 was just before the dot-com bubbles burst. So there was people were investing a lot of money in them, and it was very exciting. It was actually very exciting at the time to work with an organisation that was, whenever you looked at lots of league tables, they're always in the top two or three, best products, best performance. Again, it was very good. I think the other areas interesting was there. It was probably my very first time I'd run a significant team of size. So it was trying to manage the individual personalities of the team and the team dynamics, make sure everybody was working well together, managing conflict and resistance, and also on the other side, trying to work the staff to develop them. It was also quite good for me because at the time we were using technologies that is, which at the time were, I wouldn't say leading edge, but they were fairly new mainstream. Let's do I want a better word. So it was things like sort of like websites and things like that. I mean, websites at the time they were only brochureware, but now they were becoming more like you can actually log on and request a statement. Well, never seen this before. This is really good. Automatic telephone routing and things like that, which are now sort of like ancient. But at the time, this was like wow, this is fantastic. Can we really do this? So that was quite an eye opener thing, and it was actually quite good when these technologies went live and things you actually think this is really really good. Yeah.
Project manager at Newton.
Yeah, well, I joined Newton in '94 during the World Cup, for those who may remember. And even though I left them in 1998 to join Mellon Global Investors, effectively Newton Investment Management merged into Mellon Global Investors. So effectively, you can imagine, I changed hats, but I was virtually doing the same, similar sort of job. But when I joined Newton in '94, they were a reasonably, let's say, mid-range asset manager in the UK. I can't remember how much money was. They definitely weren't the smallest, but they definitely weren't the biggest. And when I joined in '94, they merged with another asset manager called Capital House, and they merged together, and then suddenly they became a bit bigger. But the shareholders of Newton Investment, as the new merged Newton Investment, were very, let's say, very dynamic and very aggressive in a nice way to try and grow the company. So they invested a lot of money in it, and the company, and it was almost the size of the company was doubling every year or so. It was actually phenomenal growth, and I was actually quite lucky actually because I came in just at the beginning of this growth, and I experienced, all the experience of the new processes, the new products, the new environment, the new technology, and I learned a lot. It's almost like if you can imagine, I was on the dinghy on a very shallow river, and as the company got more, the river went up, and I rose with it. That's the way I felt at the time, and I felt I was learning a hell of a lot of stuff very quickly. And it was a very nice place, a very dynamic place to work in a very growth environment. So yeah.
And you did business analyst at Coats before I
Coots,
born.
Coots.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really. All right. So you make me feel really old now. Thank you. We should do this more often. Yeah. So Coots, I joined Coots in '88. That was actually my first job. I joined when I was 18 and worked there for 6 years. Coots and Company at the time was part of NatWest, but it's actually quite famous for being the Queen's, the Royal Bankers. So they've actually got their own branch. That's the Her Majesty the Queen, as in the Queen of the UK, anyway. And Prince Charles and Princess Diana at the time. All these people were clients of the bank. They also had a large number of famous celebrities as bank clients as well, and ranging everything from lead singers of heavy metal bands to top businessmen to TV stars and Bollywood stars and pop. It's a pretty much. But they were very, very, very good. They were very good on wealth management. The customer service was phenomenal. And I just it was my first job, to be honest with you. And I did a course back in the mid '80s on computer studies, as it was called. Now it's called information technology or information systems. In those days, it was computer studies or computer science. And I did two-year college course on that, and I just applied. And I think that came from a friend of my dad's, actually. He said, apply to Coots Company. They're a good place to work. You'll enjoy it there if you can get in. It's a good career progression. And I did. And amazed myself I got in. And it was a fantastic place to work. When I joined, it was very traditional. For example, no men couldn't have a beard. You had to be clean shaven. Your hair couldn't go past your collar. You had to wear a white collar, and you had to wear long frock coats. Uh, and so it was all, which was actually sounds weird, but when you're the only person not wearing that in the office, you do feel quite strange. So it's actually odd, but it's very good actually. I learned a lot about banking, obviously there, and investment management, and I worked on a system called Quasar, which at the time I think it's actually a galactic explosion quasar, but it was a very at the time investment accounting bookkeeping system, like the market leader. And and when I got to 94 and decided to move on, and that's why I went to Newton.
Do you have any experience when you was doing BTech computer studies at Thorough Technology College?
Yeah, I did I'm going back. I mean, what the qualifications I've actually done is I did, obviously I did, in those days it was O levels, which is like when you do your 16 in the UK. I think they're called GCSEs now. After that finished, I did 2 years at a college down in called Thurrock Technical College. It was called a BTech National Diploma in Computer Studies in 1986 to 1988. And at the time, it was quite popular because it was a very pragmatic course at the time. You actually learned things like, I mean, it sounds, you probably, I cringe with embarrassment now, but you learned things like COBOL programming, Fortran programming, Pascal programming, which is a time where the main programming language is used. You also learnt things like assembler machine code, so you'll actually program computers using the ones and the zeros and things like that, which is fine until you've got to try and debug it, and then it's almost impossible. And then, and also as part of that, you did a lot of stuff around, you did a lot of work experience. You loaned out to various firms to work in their data center, help with their software programming and stuff like that. So it was a very pragmatic, hands-on course. And the reason I did that was because I felt, I'm more likely to get a job as a software developer, which I well, computer programmer in those days it was called, and nowadays it's called software developer, if I had the right technical skills. And as it turned out, that was fine, because how I got the job in Coots, really, that's how it all worked out. But as I mentioned before, I did that degree in web technology around about 2007, 2008, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, but otherwise, a lot of the technology I keep up to date with is just primarily reading magazines, listening to interviews like this and seminars like this. Obviously, I'm lucky because I've worked at the Open University. I can learn stuff from them. But probably one of the best ways to learn is actually to learn by doing. As I said before, one of the advantages of being in change management for so many years, you work across so many different projects and initiatives that you pick up a lot of knowledge just because you're doing the work. Mm.
So you worked as project manager for different companies and for different. You worked for different types of projects. So how this complete experience is telling you about the market and the industry and about the business.
Yeah, well, I think change. I mean, there's this horrible phrase that somebody uses: "change as usual," which is obviously a play on words using business as usual. So I think the biggest challenge I always find with a lot of firms and organisations is they don't treat change management or project management or program management, whatever you want to call it, as a distinct capability, as a distinct skill. They will train people to be software developers. They will train people to be marketeers. They will train people to be receptionists. They'll train people to be working on a manufacturing rig, or they will teach people sales. A lot of firms don't really treat change management as a thing that you need to learn to do. And they will just almost expect people to pick it up, send you on a 2-day Prince course or a 2-day course at a training centre and expect you to pick it up. So therefore, what I think one of the things that a lot of organisations should be looking to do is to almost have like have some sort of qualification in change management, in the same way you get qualifications in engineering and stuff like that. Because I think the key thing about change is constant. It'll be going on and on and on forever. And therefore, organisations, as I said before, need to ensure that change is treated as a proper skill, not something you can learn, by here's a book from a Cotter, go and read Cotter's book on 8 principles of change management. But also, I think organisations themselves need to develop the internal capability to manage change. Because change is not just thinking about me or you working on a project and I do the processes, you do the technology type thing. It's ensuring you've got the right governance in place to control change, because organisations can't do everything. Well, not most organisations can't do everything they need to do. So they need to have a very, very clear path to say, well, we've made a decision to do these 3 projects and not these 3 projects because these are more important, because we must do them by the end of the year for whatever reason. So I think you need that to be done. There needs to be proper processes in place. And I think also the other thing around change management, which is often forgotten about, is the sort of general communication. I mean, I don't know how many times organisations you've worked in, but I've worked in organisations where you're working on it and you get an email thinking, oh, X, Y, and Z is going live this weekend. You think, oh, I didn't have a clue that was happening, to be honest with you. It would be nice to know. But I think it's more of like a general newsletter and things like that. So I think organisations need to almost think of change as a specific skill set that they need to develop, almost in the same way they develop all the other capabilities they have.
So change is constant.
Yeah. Change is constant. Yeah, I mean, I use the phrase "change as usual." I can't remember who said it. Probably somebody, it wasn't me. It's far too clever. But yeah, change is constant. There's always changing. I mean, I've been working. And it's just, I mean, particularly in financial services, over the last 8 years, 9 years, really, probably longer than that, maybe 10 years even, to be fair, there's been constant flow of new regulation coming in. So, for example, that's been all got great names like MiFID II, EMIR, CSDR, and stuff like that. Complex bits of change that need to be implemented, and because they're set by the regulator, you've got no choice. If you don't comply, they can shut you down. And that's the worst. That's the easiest thing. They might even send you to prison. If you're unlucky. But there's also commercial changes. Competitors are changing their products, so you need to ensure that you're looking at the market and thinking, what are your competitors doing? Have we missed a trick here, or are they doing something silly? And make a proactive decision to change. Do we want to copy the competitors? Do we want to try and get ahead of them, or do you just let the competitors go because we think they're doing something silly? Yeah, and there's also also the other sort of change I look at is a change along the lines of keeping the business running on a day-to-day basis. For example, the software updates are the same. Everybody uses software packages, whether there are sort of like off-the-shelf word processors or bespoke packages developed for you. You often need to maintain those packages just to keep the business running. So it's almost like we have to upgrade to the latest version of Windows. We have to update to the latest version of the cloud software. We have to update to the latest version of the application software to ensure that we're actually compliant. We can actually keep the business running. Because I did actually, I won't say who the client is because I know this is getting recorded, and me and you will end up in court. There was a client I knew who actually was running so far behind on software packages. These are like commercial packages, not like like word processors. That the software vendor actually said to them, "We're not going to support you anymore unless you upgrade within 3 months." So basically we're on version 7 and you're on version 2 type thing. I can't remember the actual. You're miles behind. They said we're not going to support you anymore. Otherwise, so basically, then there was a big blind bit of panic to do these upgrades very, very quickly. In the end, they got the upgrades, and now they do a regular 6 monthly upgrade. Yeah, yeah. So I think change is constant, and that's why it's important. I think firms need to develop some sort of change capability to manage change in the same way they develop capabilities to manage selling or manufacturing or distribution or staff management and stuff like that. Yeah. Mm.
One last question: how this IT industry, technology industry, and the computer industry is contributing to the world?
To the world.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, when I joined, let's go back, when I started work before you were born, as you mentioned very carefully, in 1988, computers they were important, but they weren't mainstream. You know, a lot of firms, I mean, a lot of the financial services firms tended to use computing mainly for, I would say, it's mainly for ease of administration. You know, it's in like making sure they can run their accounts lists, they've got client lists, they can do bank transfers and stuff like that. I think what's actually happened is probably around, I'll probably say mid 90s, about 2000, there was I would say like a steep upward curve in technology development. So you had the internet coming in. I mean, obviously in those days it was dial-up modems, which were almost, well, at the time fantastic, but looking back, totally useless. But you start to have much more structured databases, things like, and databases become very, very good. You know, I mean, for example, now you can create a table, insert a record into it, and the constraints on the table will stop you making errors. You know, as opposed to in the old days, you used to insert a record in and there'd be errors all over the place. And that allowed far more, let's say, sophisticated technology to be developed. So you had better communication links. Then I think what happened now is after that, I would probably say from imagine early 2000s up to about say 2010, you had a explosions of, I'll call like the internet. Suddenly you had, well, at the time, 3G. I know it looks pretty poor now, but at the time 3G was fantastic. You mean you can actually have an app when you got a website, when you click on it, it takes less than 10 seconds to come back. And then you had 3G, then you had 4G. And the other thing about those things, you started to get 4G spread around. I mean, in particular in the UK, it used to be in the big cities, you had 4G, but now you have 4G across everywhere. So if you're driving between two cities, quite a rural area, the same, and I'm sure it's the same in India, because obviously India is about 5,000 times the size of the UK when it comes to land mass. You have the same issues. And so you had like blanket coverage of it. And that allowed firms, technology to become much more mainstream. Everybody can offer an app. You know, everybody's got a smartphone. They can access everything 24 hours, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I think what's also happened is with the rollout of the apps, it's allowed not so much the technology firms. Basically, what's happened, the technology firms has moved ahead. So you've got obviously like very, very complex technology infrastructures and very, 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 very dominant and powerful technology companies, you know, cloud providers, social media providers. I think the challenge, so basically to answer your question quickly, is to say that technology is now mainstream. I mean, if you lose your technology, I can't think of any industry that can operate without technology, and there's probably very few societies, maybe some remote societies in certain parts of the world can operate without technology. I think the challenge is, and with technology, is that the technology is moving so fast forward, is that the lawmakers are still behind it. So there's a lot of things that are deemed, let's say, immoral that technology firms are doing. I won't mention names, that are actually legal at the moment, but mainly because the regulators haven't had a chance to catch up. As you note, and it was very much, I consider, similar power to the credit crunch in the financial services, where a lot of these products that caused the financial crash, debt obligation vehicles and what have you, they were legal at the time. But that's because the argument could be that the regulation hadn't caught up to regulate them. So I think what's going to find with technology at the moment, obviously technology will continue to progress. You'll have 5G, 6G, 7G, tablets and iPhones and other Android devices, what have you. They will get much better and much better. PCs will get better. You'll have the rollout of newer technologies, NLP, AI, machine learning, big data, what have you. That will go forward. But I wonder if there's going to be a burst where the regulators will suddenly catch up and start regulating these technologies far more heavily, which actually in a way may slow down innovation, but may actually put more control around it. When that will happen, I don't know. I think a lot of governments in the world were paralysed with COVID-19. I think it was a lot of legislations were put on hold. It's almost a case, let's try and we forget about what we're going to our problems. Let's get through this. I think a lot of governments in the UK, Europe, in the UK, in Europe are now paralysed with the Ukraine, Crimea, Russian conflict at the moment, and that will delay issues as well. But I think going forward, technology is mainstream. You cannot live without it. I think we will find a tightening of the noose of regulation around technology in the near future as regulators start thinking we need to monitor this because, you're having technology firms that are causing fundamental changes to the way people operate that's not been regulated.
So at last, as an expert, what is your observation about my work? Have you seen any videos of mine on YouTube?
No, I've listened to a few of them actually. Sorry, and I found them very interesting. Actually, I think you've got quite an interesting little role there. Actually, speaking to lots of people, asking them lots of questions. It'd be a very interesting thing to do. I must admit, one of the things I like doing is a lot of these networking events. And also you do a lot of networking by moving around with different clients. And I find the more people you meet, you just get different perspectives on life. You just different people. There's a phrase in the UK: different folks, different strokes. Which means people are always different, and also you learn a lot. By experiencing different people, different cultures. Moves you away from your own sort of like internal biases.
I did masters in software engineering and bachelor's in computer science and engineering. So how these interviews and experts like you who are already in the industry for a long time, who know how things work, experiencing this, collecting this information and putting in my head about all this knowledge, how this is going to helpful for me if I work in IT?
I think it depends. I guess the IT is such a broad range of skills now. It goes everything from the guy outside my front door, if you can hear a bit of background noise, it must be laying internet cables or something, So it goes everything from somebody digging up a road, laying down fiber optic cables, to somebody developing something that goes on the NASA space station, all the way down to, mobile apps, software development, support. I personally think I personally feel you probably need to understand. I mean, when I do any career advice, I try and people in the UK, they call it personal branding, which is a bit of a naff name, but it's trying to work out, what do you see yourself as? Do you see yourself as a software developer or database administrator, a hardware technician? Therefore, what you need to do is work out what you want to do, and you need to brand yourself as that. So I brand myself as a change manager across many industries, and that's what I see myself as, or sometimes a consultant across many industries, depending on depending on who I'm speaking to. So I think, I mean, I don't know what you learned. I imagine you probably learned Java and sort of web technologies and networking and stuff like that, and software techniques. Work on that. I think that's a good area. I mean, if you can either apply it to let's say a specialist firm. The reason I ended up working in financial services, I live about 25 miles east of London, in a place called Essex, for those who know it. And virtually everybody used to commute into London, and everything in London was financial services. So, it became, and so, unless I wanted to work in financial services, I'm going to have to move out of the house, and I didn't want to do that. So I think from you just need to work out who you want to be. I mean, I don't know if you can apply to individual jobs. I know from a lot of the big multinationals in the UK and Europe and the US have offices in India, so they are always losing software developers. One of the most interesting jobs I always found, I always sort of quite admired, was colleagues who worked in India who tended to work for the or not so much India, but work for what was called the offshore software developers. Those big firms. Because one year you could be working on an oil firm, the next minute you could be working on a government firm, the next minute you could be working on a engineering project. Yeah. So I think it's just really what I would suggest is almost do two things. One is to find out what you think you're going to be, what you want to sell yourself as, and where do you see yourself in 5 years' time, and then work out a number of like 6-month steps or yearly steps to get there. So.
Can I put this video on my YouTube channel with your permission?
Yes, permission, as long as I'm allowed to share it to my
and also, can I put
subscribers.
this? And also, can I put this audio and video clip on my podcast, website, internet, social media, everywhere with your permission?
Yes, please do. Yeah, if you're happy with the video, of course. Yes.
So thank you, Paul, for giving me opportunity to know about you and also tell about you and your work experience and how things work for you to my audience and to the world who are watching and listening to this conversation from anywhere on this planet.
No, thank you. I'm glad you hope everybody finds. I hope you found it interesting and your listeners find it interesting. But obviously, if you need anything else, please don't hesitate to contact me.
You want to share anything to the people about your social media? But
Yeah, I mean, my name's Paul Taylor, as I mentioned before. I'm actually on LinkedIn. So if you Google, not Google, you LinkedIn search Paul Taylor, and you should see me pop up. I do have a photo on there. It's a few years old than I am now. I haven't changed that much. I'm a bit less grey, a bit more grey now, a bit less grey then. But feel free to connect with me on that. That'd be great. Happy to discuss any points I've discussed on this. Otherwise, I wish you all the best for the future.
uh, thank you, sir. Keep going, keep inspiring, and keep making world the better world. Hello. Yeah.
Oh, you still there?
Yeah.
Yeah. You stopped recording. Was
Yeah. So
that okay?
thanks. Yeah, yeah. I was telling that keep inspiring, keep making changes in the world, and also be the reason for the productivity and the energy creation on this planet.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Yeah. So fine. If you want to share it, and obviously send me your links, and I'll share it on my Twitter and Facebook, not Facebook, LinkedIn, and I've got my own website and what have you. That'd be brilliant then. So
Yeah. After completion of this video, I'll send you the links.
okay. Do you do many edits to the video, or just leave it as it
Yeah, I
is?
love it. Yeah.
That's fine. Okay. Well, let us know, and otherwise, if you want to chat about anything else, just let me know. Okay.
Yeah, definitely, definitely, I'll do.
Okay. All the best. Enjoy your day, and I'll speak to you later. Hopefully.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. You too.
Bye now.